Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute roller coaster that is the history of the Vatican. We're going to follow its wild transformation from an ancient Roman tomb into a massive temporal empire and finally shrink it all the way down to the tiny 440-acre microstate we know today. It's an incredible story of immense power, priceless art, dramatic territorial losses, and honestly, some of the most complex modern diplomacy on the entire planet. So let's just kick things off with a total mindbender. How exactly does the absolute smallest country on Earth wield such immense, outsized global power? It's a question that's fascinated historians for decades, right? Because when you look at it on a map, the math just doesn't seem to add up. I mean, just think about this contrast for a second. We are literally talking about 440 acres of physical territory. That's a space you could casually walk across in a few minutes. And yet, it holds deep spiritual influence over roughly 1 billion Catholic followers worldwide. To put that into perspective, this tiny quarter of a square mile commands an audience larger than the population of most continents. It's wild.
All right, moving to section 1, 2 entities, 1 microstate.
Okay, so to really grasp this, we have to clear up what we actually mean when we say the Vatican. The crucial point here is separating the physical ground from the ecclesiastical government. The Vatican City state is the actual, tangible real estate, established in its current form in 1929 and home to just a few hundred citizens. But the Holy See? Now that is the timeless government operating on the international stage. When countries send ambassadors to the Vatican, they're actually accredited to the Holy See, representing the global Catholic Church. Keeping that distinction in mind is absolutely vital for understanding how they navigate global politics today. Section 2, From Tomb to Temporal Empire. Let's track how this whole thing snowballed over the centuries. We're going to follow the Vatican's massive physical expansion and its eventual dramatic contraction across a few key historical turning points, starting with the Edict of Milan straight through the Lateran Treaty. Our story really kicks off way back in 313 AD. Emperor Constantine, right after converting to Christianity, signed the Edict of Milan. This was a total game changer. It allowed the very first St. Peter's Basilica to be built directly over a simple, rustic underground shrine that supposedly marked the tomb of the martyred Apostle Peter. At that incredible moment, the physical and spiritual foundation for all future papal power was officially set in stone. Over the next few centuries, the popes played what was basically the ultimate geopolitical long game. They transformed this religious base into a vast temporal empire. First, they established ties with the Byzantine emperor. Then, amidst the chaos of regional invasions, they secured massive land donations, most famously the donation of Pepin in 756 AD. This essentially birthed the Papal States, carving out a massive territorial buffer right in the middle of central Italy. And the big takeaway here? They weren't just spiritual leaders anymore. They were temporal monarchs, commanding armies and ruling vast swaths of land. Section 3. Art, Architecture, and Power. You know, it's fascinating because the source material points out that this monumental art wasn't just pretty decoration. It's described as an ecstasy of gold that served a deeply religious ritual. All that incredible artistry we associate with the Vatican today, it was purposely designed to elevate the spiritual experience and project absolute awe-inspiring power. To bankroll this golden age and massive construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica, wow, it took a lot. The Vatican relied on immense wealth. We're talking heavy investments from ultra-powerful families like the House of Borgia. They commissioned absolute legends of the Renaissance like Michelangelo and Bernini. And how did they afford it? By using substantial gold mined directly within their own papal states, alongside massive backing from European wealth, including, literally, the Spanish crown jewels. This was an absolute economic juggernaut. And the crazy thing is, even today, that ancient artistic legacy is a massive economic engine. At full capacity, the Vatican State brings in roughly 400 million euros in revenue, and a staggering 70% of that comes straight from museum and garden entrance fees. Another 20% comes from their global real estate holdings, and only about 10% from global donations. Their history is quite literally paying for their present. Section 4. The Loss of the Lands. But, of course, nothing lasts forever. Which brings us to a highly dramatic historical turning point, one that really forces us to ask, what exactly happens to a powerful temporal monarch who suddenly loses their entire kingdom? How does an institution built on centuries of land ownership survive when all that land is suddenly gone? Well, we got our answer in 1870. The Italian unification movement stormed the Papal States. They completely stripped the Pope of his temporal empire, folding Rome into the new Kingdom of Italy. The Pope, totally refusing to accept this new reality, became a self-declared prisoner, trapped behind the Vatican walls. I mean, think about it. For over 1,000 years, they had ruled central Italy, and boom, overnight they were confined to just a few buildings.
Section 5. Rebirth via Lateran Treaty.
By 1929, that tense impasse finally had to be broken. The Church negotiated the famous Lateran Treaty, and in a deeply controversial twist of history, they signed it with Benito Mussolini's fascist government. This treaty officially established the tiny, independent Vatican City state we know today. In exchange, the Vatican acknowledged the permanent Italian annexation of Rome, and Mussolini gave the Church a massive financial compensation package for all those lost territories. Now, the politics of this were, well, incredibly thorny. As Pope Pius XI saw it, this new independent Catholic state was an absolute necessity to counter rising secularism and communism. But while that treaty secured their survival, it permanently tied their modern sovereignty to some very complex, real-world political compromises of the 1920s. Section 6. Modern Influence and Lingering Controversies. Look at the absolute juggling act they pull off today. On the diplomatic front, they hold UN observer status and are constantly involved in global peacemaking. For security, they rely on that famous 140-member Swiss Guard and their own local police force. But then, look at their finances. They have vast real estate and tourism revenues, sitting right alongside reports of a staggering €4 billion debt. It's a highly, highly complex operation. But as an impartial explainer of the historical texts, we also have to look at the darker, modern controversies that the sources detail. These documents outline several intense mysteries that have really shadowed the Vatican. This includes the alleged conspiracies surrounding the sudden 1978 death of Pope John Paul I, who died just 33 days after his election. There's also the still unsolved 1982 disappearance of teenager Emanuela Orlandi and the 1983 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. The sources also put a big spotlight on ongoing financial scandals that have repeatedly dragged the Vatican into the headlines. We're talking about 1994 televised cash payoffs to high-ranking clergy, the 2005 revelations of that mounting institutional debt, and the dramatic 2013 arrests of Vatican accountants for leaking highly secretive documents. The texts consistently point out this glaring inequity between the Church's extravagant historical wealth and its massive modern financial turmoil. So, what's the big takeaway from all this source material? Well, we're left looking at a stark, modern paradox. Right here, we have an incredibly wealthy historical state, a microstate of just 900 citizens, that is simultaneously grappling with immense debt and intense, relentless international scrutiny over its financial operations and historical secrets. Which leaves us with one final, really provocative question to end on. Can an ancient, highly secretive institution built on millennia of tradition and closed-door diplomacy successfully adapt to a modern world that demands total accountability and transparency? It is a balancing act of biblical proportions, and you better believe the whole world is watching to see how the Vatican handles its next chapter.